evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to episode 10 of Pigskin Glory. And no, I'm not born in 1976, but we are entering 1976, so we are going vintage 1976. One other side note, on a personal note, you'll notice no set behind me today. We're rearranging, remodeling the living room, so we're in a flux. But let's get right to it and go ahead and share my screen. Oh, wait, before I share my screen, let me introduce my cast members. Going clockwise to my right, he's the Buffalo Bill fan stuck in Wisconsin, does not grate his cheese with a giant grater, Chris K.
No one circles the cheese wagons like the Buffalo Bills.
For us two Buffalo Bills fans, tomorrow in 2026, we are going head-to-head against the bottom right-hand corner, Denver Bronco fan, Mark.
Hi, everybody.
And also playing tomorrow, as all four of us have teams in the playoffs, Charles from the Bay Area, he's a 49er fan.
That's right.
All right, let's take a look at January 1st, 1976, and what we've got to look at. First and foremost, Happy New Year, everybody. 1976 comes in on a Thursday. Now, none of us are old enough to celebrate this New Year's, but what would be a typical way you would celebrate a New Year in your youth, guys?
Staying up watching the random bowl games like Peach.
And watching Dead Claw Studios Rockin' Eve.
Yeah, I was we had dinner, but I was primarily growing up. I was watching the Cotton Bowl, the Rose Bowl, and the Orange Bowl were the three bowl games I watched the most those days.
Well, funny thing, because those are three bowls of focus on January 1st. Then you got the honors.
Sadly, we start off with some bad news as 1976 begins with a passing. Harry Bliss, a back for the Columbus Panhandles from 1921. There was no obituary found. So as the Bliss family begins with some bad news in 1976. But then we move on to the Cotton Bowl, and it's my Georgia Bulldogs taking on the Arkansas Razorbacks, which today in 2026 would be a conference matchup. Back then was the Cotton Bowl. As number 12 Arkansas beat number 18 Georgia 31-10. While this didn't have the national title implications a la the other New Year's Bowl games, it was still a battle of 9-2 teams. This game's tied at 10 through three quarters, with Arkansas touchdown coming after a bizarre shoestring play. Quarterback Ray Goff bent over like he was going to tie a shoe, then flipped it to Gene Washington, but it was scooped up by Razorback at the Georgia 13 and turned into a touchdown. In the fourth quarter, Georgia's Junkyard Dog defense, so reliable all year, imploded as the Hogs scored three unanswered touchdowns to run away and hide. The Hogs at one point this season were 4-2, but their last six, which included not just this game, but also against then number 2 Texas A&M, Frank Broyles, head coach of the Hogs since 1958, showed that he still hasn't lost his touch. Chris, the Arkansas Razorbacks have played some major spoiler here at the end of the season. What is your thoughts on Frank Broyles' almost 20 years with the Arkansas Razorbacks being able to get them up for this game?
You can't teach an old dog new tricks. Broyles has still got it. There's something to be said about that wily veteran coach who always seems to find ways. He found a way to get past A&M, and he found a way to frustrate Georgia. This is when you're a legendary coach. Sometimes the coach can pull out games like this.
Anybody else have anything to say about the Cotton Bowl?
I don't want it. Could Arkansas make a run at a national championship in 1976?
It's always a good question. Everybody, it's wide open, especially back in the days where the difference between the mid-major schools and the major schools is not as pronounced as it is today. 1976 will be an interesting year to look at. And we move on to the granddaddy of them all, the Rose Bowl, as Ohio State takes on UCLA. In the Rose Bowl at Pasadena, number 11, UCLA stuns number 1 Ohio State 23-10. This wasn't looking like your typical granddaddy of them all. The Bruins were facing a team that had throttled them in October, and even getting to Pasadena, they had lost 8 fumbles in their sloppy victory over USC. When they trailed 3-0 at halftime, it didn't get a first down until late in the second quarter. Some were wondering if the Cal Golden Bears would have been a more worthy representative and that 15.5-point underdog UCLA had lucked out with USC's November tailspin. But then Dick Vermeil's veer option run, Heavy Bruins, suddenly had an about face and suddenly started passing. John Sciarra, who had a ratio of 6 to 12 touchdowns to interception, validated his 1975 first team All America quarterback honors as he threw 2 touchdowns to Wally Henry, one of them 67 yards, and suddenly they led 16-3. Meanwhile, the Buckeyes uncharacteristically started throwing. Even when they cut the lead to 16-10, instead of riding with Archie Griffin and Pete Johnson, an interception set up the Bruins' kill shot, a 54-yard touchdown by Wendell Tyler. Both teams ran for over 200 yards, but in terms of passing, Ohio State threw for 90 to the Bruins' 212. A startling about face for a team not known for passing since the days of Gary Beeman. A Bruins team that had an inexplicable tie with 2-8-1 Air Force had improbably won the Rose Bowl, and now the national title was up in the air for Oklahoma or even Arizona State. For Ohio State, it was 30 minutes of hell, a painful end to Archie Griffin's storied career, and a missed chance with Woody Hayes' finest squad since his 1968 Super Sophomore National Champions. For the Pac-10, it feels that no matter the state or of their conference champion, they seemingly can do no wrong on January 1st in Pasadena. Dick Vermeil, the big man on campus in a post-John Wooden UCLA, could be a hot commodity in the NFL a la John Ralston, who rode 2 Rose Bowl successes to the Denver Broncos job. Mark, UCLA coming in here and upsetting Ohio State, ending Archie Griffin's college career like this. What does that say for Dick Vermeil and his potential future, either with UCLA or in the NFL?
I think right now there not there now in 76 the sky is high. That an underdog team goes in there and pounds that firehouse that Ohio State is. I think he can stay there and build on it, or it can look for his future in the NFL possibly.
And remember, not only you should know this, Mark, because again, John Ralston, he won Rose Bowls as an underdog. He took the job for your Broncos. And on the flip side, if John Wooden's gone and now Dick Vermeil could be the big man on campus with with John Wooden gone.
Charles,
Yes.
how about Archie Griffin's career coming to an end and they're not putting the ball in his hands? He will have a chance in the NFL, obviously, but this was his swan song in college.
I mean, that's a sad way to go out. Not getting the ball and key opportunities. That's just not right.
And Chris,
But
we've been
you're
talking
right.
about
Archie will get a chance in the NFL. Well, and who? That remains to be seen.
And Chris, we've been talking about the running backs all season long, how big of a role they played in the 1975 season. 1976 begins, and all of a sudden the coaches are pulling away from the running backs. What does that say for the future of college football?
Well, I think it says that in college football, you no longer have to just depend on one running back doing all the heavy work. Although, ironically, one of the guys who caught the touchdowns in this game, Wally Henry, will ironically be best known for 2 fumbles in an NFL playoff game.
Now we move on to the 1976 Orange Bowl, Michigan versus Oklahoma. In the Orange Bowl at Miami, number 3 Oklahoma beats number 5 Michigan 14-6. This was history in the making. The first time a Big Ten team has played in Miami. The first time 2 Big Ten teams in the same season made bowl games. The first ever meeting between 2 of college football's behemoths. And a big-time coaching matchup of Barry Switzer versus Bo Schembechler. With Ohio State's loss, the Sooners now controlled their destiny for another national championship, while a loss would perhaps allow Arizona State to claim the title. Oklahoma, a team that lives and dies by the wishbone offense, actually did their scoring thanks to non-pitch plays, a 40-yard pass that set up a 39-yard reverse for 1 touchdown, and a 10-yard touchdown run around the left side. Their defense, which at times had been up and down the season, came up with a clutch fourth-quarter interception and 23 combined tackles for the Selman brothers. For Michigan, it was another tough bowl loss. With new bowl rules for the Big Ten, Bo will at least have more opportunities outside of Pasadena. For the Sooners, it was the completion of an amazing run of good fortune since their Kansas loss, escaping near disaster versus Missouri, A&M's loss, which took them out of the running, and the Buckeyes' second-half collapse, and tonight. Despite being On probation and needing a handful of things to break right, the Sooners have won their second straight national title in 3 seasons under Barry Switzer. He had a job to do, and he's going to do it, baby. Chris, what way did Barry Switzer do this?
We got a job to do. We got to do it, baby.
That was a incredible performance by the Steelers, despite all the obstacles and being on probation.
And remember, A&M losing was huge because if A&M had beaten Arkansas, they would have been the team in line to capitalize. Has a potential undefeated team, but it didn't happen. And think about this, Vinny. Oklahoma was trailing Missouri. They had to go for 2. They had to survive a missed field goal. They were this close to not even playing in the Orange Bowl. And now they've won another national championship despite being on probation.
A picture-perfect quarterback option on New Year's 1976. The 1976 Sugar Bowl was a tightly contested game between Michigan and Oklahoma. As the fourth quarter started, Sooner quarterback Steve Davis kept the ball on the quarterback option and spliced through the Michigan D for 10 yards and a 14-0 lead. Let's take a look back. I don't know why Facebook sometimes does that. Sometimes it'll scroll to another video. Here's a look at the Oklahoma. They're in the veer wishbone, and Steve Davis is going to keep the ball on the option and get around the Michigan left end for the touchdown.
A direct snap. What a concept. Oklahoma scoring a touchdown that doesn't revolve around a pitch out.
Mark,
Unlike Nebraska,
Oklahoma's turnaround after that Kansas loss.
You know, they had to beat Missouri. And again, that could have easily gone the other way. You know, they had to beat Nebraska, obviously, and that was a tight game through 3 quarters. They watched A&M lose. They watched Ohio State lose. But, you know, they had their close calls earlier this year. But you know what? Destiny favors the fortunate. And sometimes it's good to be lucky and lucky to be good. And Oklahoma just happened to have everything fall in place. And they they came up big when they had to.
We move on to Friday, January 2nd. The legendary Paul Brown resigns from Cincinnati. The man who founded 2 franchises retires as a legend. Bengals Brown resigns. McCormick named aide. Mark, Paul Brown's legacy, explain to us what it means to the game of professional football as seemingly his career comes to an end on this January 2nd.
It's mind blowing. It's Cincinnati, and then that's a hot contested division they're in. It's going to be a big loss to the Cincinnati fans and to the football.
Whoever coaches for the Bengals, he's gonna have some very big shoes to fill. So
yeah,
right coach.
So
kind of like USC with John Robinson.
Mike McCormick is going to take charge of the hiring for the Bengals' new coach. What are some potential candidates out there, you think, for Cincinnati?
Well, we talked about Dick Vermeil earlier, and, you know, you're thinking about the coach. You know, John McKay is already somewhere. But don't forget, the Seahawks have yet to hire a coach. So the Bengals are also competing with the Seahawks for a new coach. And of course, Philadelphia, where McCormick just came from. You know, they've got some guys on their team. There's this guy named Bill Walsh. Maybe they could promote him, but who's to say? Remember, I don't know a darn thing what the Bengals are going to do. I mean, there's this Bill Walsh guy who coordinated their hot offense. Maybe he could be the guy.
Maybe.
Yeah, that's a good possibility. Now we move on to some more college news. Will college football ever crown a true national championship? And should the NFL fear congressional interference? Bear Bryant is not satisfied with the way the season ended, and he thinks that the tie-ups with bowls should be abolished and a national playoff system should be introduced. Mark, what are your thoughts on a potential college football playoff, a CFP, if you will?
Yeah, everybody else does it. I wouldn't mind seeing it. I understand the bowl games and they make a lot of revenue, but I wouldn't mind seeing the top 8 teams and have a bowl playoff for the national championship.
And it's amazing. It's amazing. It took nearly 40 years to finally get it, a college football playoff.
And don't forget, there was a time when 1 versus 2 was such a rarity. Like, Mark, you're a Penn State fan. When Penn State played Miami in that national championship game, that was an anomaly amidst the era of conference tie-ins.
Yeah, it was. But like I said, they're talking about this back here in '76. Yeah, I think they should go to a playoff format. Everybody else does it. Why is the main college 1A football teams not having one?
And then
Even though
I remember in my teen years in the '90s talking about it, and I came up with a way to do a 16 team college playoff, and we're still not there in 2026. 16 is the only real way to go. But does anybody know what was the number for college basketball in '76? How many? Because obviously we weren't at 64 until the '80s. What was the number for college at this time?
I think it was less than 32. In fact, fun fact, Vinny, we didn't even have seeding until 1979. So it's not like, certain teams are placed. It was always about region, not merit. Like UCLA would always be in the West. It wouldn't be until, much later when UCLA would be placed in other regions. Like, remember, Vinny, as you know, Duke's only made one Final Four from the West region. There was a time when if you were an ACC team, you were locked into your Southeast.
Okay, one other thing from this news clipping. Senator Howard Baker of Tennessee has called for an investigation into the NFL's antitrust exemption. Howard is mad because the league won't admit Memphis World Football League team as an expansion franchise. Guys, we see it all the time in politics, and this isn't a political show, so we're not going to get into it, but senators will try and curry favor with their home electors by bringing up a topic that is means something to that local area. But on a grand scheme of things, is the United States Senate really should be getting involved with how the NFL runs their mergers?
No, and here's the thing with Memphis, remember, this was literally the franchise that literally, all those Dolphins that left Miami, they all signed with Memphis. You think Don Shula is probably saying, guys, they stole our three players. We're not going to allow them in the league.
I think that's a big, good point. The Memphis, what was their name? Do anybody know?
Memphis Southmen.
Memphis Southmen. That doesn't even roll off the tongue, to be honest with you. But the Memphis Southmen basically came in and wrecked the Dolphins dynasty, and they missed the playoffs in '75. So Don Shula, who was always on the competition committee, would not be in favor of that to begin with. All right, so there's nothing on Saturday, January 3rd. So we move right to Conference Championship Sunday. And it's the big one in the AFC, the one that we have every year, Oakland at Pittsburgh. This is the fourth straight year from 72 to 75. They've met every year in the playoffs. In the AFC Championship game, the Steelers freeze the Raiders 16-10. An unpredictable AFC season ended with a predictable ending. Oakland, Pittsburgh once again. But this time, it was at Three River Stadium where the weather was cold and the icy field would play havoc. The game was unexpectedly sloppy, with a combined 12 turnovers. To go along with the expected hard hits and physicality, this game took a while to get going. It was 3-0 after 3 quarters. The difference was Pittsburgh capitalizing on mistakes as both their touchdowns came immediately off Oakland turnovers. The Raiders recovered an onside kick to give themselves a shot with seconds left, but couldn't get out of bounds to give themselves one last shot. The Steelers had once again beaten a formidable opponent and continued their rise from the start of the decade to being on the verge of equaling Miami's feat of going back-to-back. For Oakland, it was their third straight AFC Championship game loss. Since Super Bowl II, they have won seemingly everything there is to win except the game's greatest prize. One has to wonder if the Raiders are on the verge of being what Dallas once was, next year's champion. Mark, as you live in the Pennsylvania area, obviously I know you weren't there at the time, but what do you think the atmosphere would be in Western Pennsylvania as Pittsburgh goes to their second straight Super Bowl?
here in Western PA probably was about as high as they can get. This is, in my opinion, the team to beat right now in all of football. They are the defending Super Bowl champions. They went out to Oakland and beat a good Oakland team last year. They came home. They held home court this year, and they beat a good Oakland team. Right now, they are. This is a young squad that had that super draft last year. They're the team to beat. They are going to be the team to beat for a long time.
And what's crazy, Mark, is that going into the 1970s, they were the team that everybody beat up on. And now, Charles, it's like it's a real rags to riches because at the end of the 60s, they were as bad as it gets, and now they're at the top of the game. It's kind of like what the Oakland Athletics metamorphosis from KC to dynasty.
Yeah, that's right.
Charles, speaking
And
of
the way they have been NFL's bright space for the last 10 years. You gotta wonder, will the Raiders finally catch the bouquet?
Charles, you bring up a good point, and that's the question I was going to ask you is what about John Madden? In 2025, when a coach can't get over a hump, you hear it from their fan base all the time. Well, maybe we should move on. I don't see a lot of crying in the newspapers to move on from John Madden, but what is it that he should do to get the Raiders past Pittsburgh, past the AFC Championship, into a Super Bowl? Charles?
Just get one key impact, just get a new key impact player, or what needs to be addressed. I just hope I look what.
By the way, Charles, I should note that Oakland did actually beat Pittsburgh in a playoff game in 1973. So it's not like they've have never beaten them when it matters. But now and remember, now that we have the true seeing, I think if you're with Oakland, what you want is literally home field throughout and make everyone come through you.
In a
Steelers,
In a frozen flash, Franco Harris beats the Raiders. On a frozen field for the AFC Championship, Pittsburgh and Oakland struggled to move the ball until this run in the fourth quarter when Franco Harris broke outside and went 25 yards for the game's first touchdown. The Steelers' 10-0 lead gave the Steelers fans a lot to cheer for, trying to win their second straight Super Bowl.
By the way, Vinny, only 5 games into his play. I mean, you want to talk about Franco Harris? Has he already becoming a playoff legend in just such a short period of time?
Playoff legend and a Oakland Raider killer for sure.
Not just the immaculate reception, but remember, he has a Super Bowl MVP. It's easy to forget, but he was the Super Bowl MVP against Minnesota.
Yeah, I was gonna say he ran for what 150 some yards.
Terry Bradshaw heaves it for all he's stalworth. Leading the Raiders 10-7 in the fourth, Terry Bradshaw avoided a rush and threw into double coverage. But John Stallworth caught it for the score. The 16-7 lead would be insurmountable.
And that proved to be critical because if they had to settle for a field goal, which wouldn't have been a guarantee, Oakland got the field goal from Blanda. And by the way, on a side note, this would be the final game of George Blanda's career dating back to 1949.
Yeah, ever since the days when the NFL was competing against the double AFC, George Blanda has seen 2 rival leagues merge with the NFL. He played in one of them in the AFL. He won AFL championships. He's been on teams in the playoffs with the Oilers, the Raiders, and a legendary
The
career
guy's
for
a
sure
legend.
comes to an end.
Charles, I've got a great way to sum it up. Listen to this, Charles. When George Blanda started his professional career, Casey Stengel was a rookie manager in the major leagues. When George Blanda ended his career, the reserve clause was finally gone.
Yeah.
We move on to the NFC Championship. It's Dallas at the Rams. Remember, the Cowboys come in as the wild card team. In the NFC Championship game, the Cowboys shocked the Rams 37-7. With Minnesota no longer an obstacle, LA was now hosting the NFC title game and just needed a warm weather victory to make it to a Super Bowl. But instead of Ron Jaworski, who had steered them past St. Louis and Pittsburgh, Chuck Knox went with regular starter James Harris back from a shoulder injury. His first pass of the game was picked off. The Cowboys turned it into a touchdown, and everything that could go wrong would go wrong. Preston Pearson, no relation to last week's Hail Mary hero, caught the first touchdown as well as a spectacular diving catch for another. Well, catch, we don't know. But sandwiched around a Golden Richards touchdown, it was 21-0 at halftime. After Pearson scored once again and 2 more field goals, the score ballooned at one point to a shocking 34-0. For Los Angeles, it's now twice in 1 year they have lost to Dallas. Their one setback in between versus the 49ers essentially came down to a 54-yard field goal, but in 2 games versus the Cowboys, they were outscored 55-14. Dallas, who had lost at home to the Chiefs and Packers, had waylaid a pair of 12-2 NFC teams on the road in consecutive weeks. Their youth, lack of experience, no true number one running back, and a knack of playing down to the competition was questioned all year. But Roger Staubach's passing was always good enough to overcome any of these red flags, and even amidst their hiccups, came through with flying colors against St. Louis and Washington. Today was a matter of which Cowboys would show up, and on this day it was indeed the good one. Now the question is, will the first Super Bowl wildcard fare any better versus the Steel Curtain than Minnesota did last year? Chris, the Cowboys coming out of the wild card, and we know that they didn't call it a wild card in '69 when the Chiefs did it. But what would you give the Cowboys' chances going up against the Steel Curtain?
Well, I give them a more than reasonable chance because, unlike Minnesota, which was lugging the baggage of past failures, and they have as many Super Bowls as Pittsburgh, and they got some guys from those teams. And, I don't, and they played them a couple of times before. They have some experience. I don't think they're going to be awed by the experience of playing in the Super Bowl. And, I know they played down. I know they lost to the Chiefs, the game we watched, and they did lose to the Packers. But again, it was a matter of which Cowboys are going to show up. Dr. Jekyll showed up against the Rams. The question is, will Mr. Hyde show up in 2 weeks?
And that's going to be the big question. The Steelers are going to be favored, I'm pretty sure, in this year in the Super Bowl.
Charles, what are your thoughts on the coach not sticking with the hot hand, the quarterback that had played the last 2 games, instead going back to the regular season starter in James Harris?
I, I, I don't know. Never did, but I go with the hot hand to start. And if he struggles early, then you can bring Jamie Harris in the game. But given the way the Cowboys play, I don't think it would have mattered.
Okay, guys, I want you to direct your attention to this touchdown, and I want you to make the call. A Dallas touchdown that wouldn't count today. Editor's pick. This comes from John, our Jets fan, who helps me pick touchdowns. Already leading 14-0, Roger Staubach threw a 15-yard pass to running back Preston Pearson, who made a diving touchdown for a 21-0 lead over the Rams in the NFC Championship. Now take a close look, because the ball clearly hit the ground, and NFL Films does a great job of making it sound like a beautiful play. But in 2026, it wouldn't count. It wouldn't have changed the outcome, but whenever anybody complains about the catch rule back then, there wasn't a chance to review it.
Now, with that said, Vinny, my question is, was this more or less controversial than the Butch Johnson Super Bowl play? I mean, was this any, how would you compare this to that one?
Well, in my opinion, they're both very clear video evidence in a time when instant replay wasn't used that the ball was not controlled and caught and should not have counted. Now, that neither one changes the outcome of either game. The Cowboys won this game by 30. They probably still would have scored at least a field goal. They were 15 yards out. And the Super Bowl, they won by 17, so they still would have won that one most likely. But as you can see, as the ball is coming down, and Preston Pearson, great effort. It hits the ground. He pulls it in too far, and he cradles it in his body. And you can see the referee is hidden behind his body, so he calls it touchdown. He does what any referee would have done in that spot live. But we know in 2025, 2026, no catch, move on to the next down.
I want to touch on the Rams for a minute. They lost their first game to the Cowboys. They lost their last game to the Cowboys. In between, the only loss was on a 54-yard field goal. So they damn near beat everybody except for Dallas. I guess, and remember they lost them 2 years ago. I think the Rams basically have a bit. So basically the Rams have 2 bugaboos, Minnesota and Dallas.
Moving on to Monday, January 5th, we have another passing to report. John Madigan, center and tackle for the Minneapolis Marines in 1924, died at the age of 76 on January 5th. He graduated from St. Thomas University in 1922, received a master's degree in 1935 from the University of Minnesota. And of course, it does not talk about his one. I think he played like 1 or 2 games. But Pro Football Reference does include everybody who even played a snap in the NFL. So passing away on January 5th, 1976, John Madigan. Moving on, still on January 6th, the NFL referees are being sued. The lawsuit charges that the NFL officials are charging them with cheating. This comes out of Minneapolis as well. A complaint charging the National Football League officials with being incompetent and asking for his dismissal was received Monday in the U.S. District Court. The court's clerk office said that the complaint was being studied to determine whether it was properly prepared and should be accepted for filing. The suit charges the NFL was with negligently and carelessly permitting the stockholders of the national television airways to be cheated, defrauding, and deceiving in presentation of NFL football games due to the illegal, careless, arbitrary, and capricious officiating. It sounds like a Jackie Chan character from Seinfeld with all the words. I'm not going to read on. If you want to read more, you can. But basically, it charges NFL official Jerry Bergman, controversial ruling in the Cowboys-Vikings game. Mark, this is a fan filing a lawsuit against an NFL. How frivolous is this?
It's gonna say it's about as frivolous can get. There's no way this. I wouldn't be surprised if the judge tosses this out and just says, "Come on."
Before they had to put warning labels on hot coffee, Chris, fans were still making frivolous lawsuits. And this one, as Mark said, is about as frivolous as can be.
Indeed.
What goes through a fan's mind to think that this is even a good idea?
I think it's just emotion. Sometimes you let emotions run away with you. I mean, it's one thing to. There are times when suing can work, but this is not one of them.
All right, Charles, we've got a Trims Arena picture. Imagine a field goal kicker that can kick so hard he'd put the defensive lineman through the uprights as well.
Wow.
I will tell you this one. I know who the kicker isn't. It's not Charlie Brown.
What?
Good grief.
Doing Marcy.
Yes, sir.
All right, moving on to still on January 6th. Lynn Swan's still in the hospital. Steelers wide receiver was put in the hospital in concussion protocol. It's not what they called it back then. But he was carried from the Three Rivers Stadium on a stretcher on Sunday. Mark, this is a big loss for the Steelers if Swanee can't play.
Yeah, he's their. I was gonna say he's definitely your big deep pass threat for sure, and that would be a huge loss comes the Super Bowl if he can't play against the Cowboys.
Chris, it's a good thing that there's 2 weeks between the conference championship and the Super Bowl. A concussion, especially in 1976, healthcare is a lot easier to get cleared from than it would be in 2026. But even then, you would hope 2 weeks would be enough to get cleared.
Oh, absolutely. Because, with concussions, in fact, I'll just use the 2026 example. If you saw the playoff game on Monday, Nico Collins, Texans wide receiver, had the concussion on Monday. 6 days later, short week, he's not going to be, looks like he's not going to play on Sunday.
You think back to all the NFL highlight films from Super Bowl 10, and really, Super Bowl highlights are made from Super Bowl 10. I mean, without Lynn Swan's catches, and we'll get to that in episode 12, obviously. Episode 12. Lynn Swan made the highlight a thing because of Super Bowl 10, and just think that he was doing that post-concussion. Okay, it's Monday. Super Bowl orders for Dallas Cowboys work. The Cowboys are going to their 4th Super Bowl, the Steelers their 2nd, and Tom Landry knows how to prepare the Cowboys, Charles, for the Super Bowl. Should this 4th appearance in the Super Bowl be any different, because there's been 4 years since, this is their 3rd Super Bowl, I'm sorry, 3rd. I'm sorry, I was wrong. It's been 3 years since they've been in the Super Bowl. How different do you think is Tom Landry going to handle this, knowing they won it back in 1971, so 4 years. Yeah, 4 years.
They're gonna be more. Tom Landry's gonna get his team more focused. And my father, they're a Cowboys fan ever since they're in substitute. He's hoping to get the 3rd time's the charm for Dallas. He lost to Baltimore and then lost to Miami.
No, they beat Miami.
They beat Miami. 24-3.
Why?
They do have a
What
Super
is
Bowl
that?
championship.
Sort of the Dolphins going perfect the following year to advance that loss to Dallas.
That Dallas loss was actually the last loss until September of '73.
Chris, Mike Thomas from the Washington Redskins. He is the NFC Rookie of the Year according to the UPI.
I think they got it right. And remember, Walter Payton didn't really come on until late in the season, and Thomas was a key part of Washington. When the Washington was making the surge.
Yep. Redskins, they scout Mike Thomas is running back. He came out of UNLV, and especially in 1975, that is a terrific find for a not as well known college, University of Nevada, Las Vegas. All right, we got
UNLV.
still more news from the six. Preston Pearson reflects on the days of old and knows waiver. Remember, Preston Pearson, Charles, is the only Dallas Cowboy who was not drafted by the Cowboys. He was claimed off waivers from the Steelers, so he has a reason for revenge going into Super Bowl 10.
Yeah, stick it to the team that basically cut him.
By the way, that Sabres headline, Vinny, the Buffalo Sabres scored 10 goals in a game in an exhibition game against the Soviets.
Yep, no doubt.
Wow.
Passing away on January 7th, 1976, Jack Morlock, wingback for the Detroit Lions in 1940. No obituary found. Moving on to January 8th, we got a Super Bowl preview now out of the Cowboys defense coming on strong. This is a battle. Super Bowl 10 is a battle of two of the more well-known defenses of the time, the Steel Curtain and Doomsday. But Doomsday's gone through some changes in the last couple of years, Mark. There's some new faces on the Cowboy defense that had taken them to a couple other Super Bowls.
Yeah, I think they've gotten a little bit younger since those earlier Super Bowl runs in 5 and 6.
Remember, Chuck Howley won the MVP in Super Bowl 5, although he shouldn't have. That's a story I can go on about for another time. You had Mr. Cowboy himself. He's got a lot of those Cowboy defenders are gone, as well as some of the offense. Mike Ditka's gone. Lance Allworth's gone. This is a different Cowboy team going into Super Bowl 10 than was at Super Bowl 6. Noel praises his coaching staff that led to the Super Bowl. Chris, we always talk about the hot coordinators coming out of the Super Bowl teams. You don't hear about it as much maybe in the 70s, but Chuck Noll is definitely putting the praise on his coaching staff. And let's see if we can't click on that and see if they say who they are.
Bud Carson, he's the mastermind behind the Steel Curtain.
Bud Carson, defensive coordinator. Yep. You've got
And there's
George Perry's.
George
Perry's on
Pearls,
defensive line.
that front four, that's George Pearls, who ironically will make a name for himself in the college coaching game.
Dan Radakovich with the offensive line. I don't see if there's any other names, but Chuck Noll thinks that there's some guys here who can be head coaches in the future. And, of course, Chris mentioned that there definitely are. We know Bud Carson will get a shot with the Cleveland Browns in the 80s.
And George Pearls will win a Rose Bowl at Michigan State.
January 10th. We got some legal transactions. January 10th, of course, is a Saturday. And we're going to wrap up here. The NFL Players Association has filed new unfair labor charges against the league owners yesterday for refusing to negotiate contracts in good faith. Now, Mark, something tells me this legal motion will have more merit than the fans suing the referee in Minneapolis.
Yeah, they should have a little more merit. We'll have to see how this plays out.
Is there labor strife in the National Football League, Charles?
It looks like there is based on that article there.
And remember, we're what, only a year and a half removed from that near strike. We had a strike in August of '74, and we almost had one in the September of '75.
Yep.
Here is the cover of the Hula Bowl, the 30th annual Hula Bowl All-American Football Classic featuring Archie Griffin. The early weekends in January when the NFL is done, means College football all-star games, and the Hula Bowl is no different. On January 10th, the East tops the West in Honolulu. What do we got? Purdue's Mike Pruitt and Kentucky's Sonny Collins helped the East forge to a 16-0 victory over the West in the 30th annual Hula Bowl. What else we got? Don Bitterlick of Temple.
I actually wrote a little description about that game.
I see that. Let's go so it's on the screen. In the Hula Bowl at Aloha Stadium, the East beats the West 16-0. The first instance of this game at Hawaii's new stadium had plenty of star power. Ricky Bell, Joe Washington, Chuck Muncie, Leroy Selman, but it was another running back and a kicker who stole the spotlight. All 16 points came from the unexpected pair of Purdue's Mike Pruitt and Temple kicker Don Butterlick, who had a touchdown and 10 points respectively. Mark, do you ever watch the Senior Bowl or the Hula Bowl, these college all-star games?
I watched a few of them. Yes.
What are your
By the way,
thoughts on them as far as draft prospects go? And has anybody ever stood out to you as, man, I don't know who this kid is, but I can't wait to see him in the NFL?
It's been a long time since I've watched those. I don't even, there might have been one or two. It's been a lot. I did watch them occasionally, but it's been years.
I remember two from the 90s that stuck out to me. I watched the games. I think one was a Hula Bowl, one was a Senior Bowl. I'm not sure which was which, so forgive me for getting this wrong. But one I hit on and one I missed on. One was a linebacker out of Louisville named Alan Campos. I thought he was going to be the next big thing, the next Derek Thomas, Lawrence Taylor. He was all over the place in the All-Star game. Dallas drafted him, which was his first strike, but then he just kind of went nowhere and is a name that you probably never heard of unless you were in the same shoes I was that day watching him. The other one was a running back named Antoine Smith, and he did, although he didn't have a Hall of Fame career, he did hit. He took over for Thurman Thomas with the Buffalo Bills and would go on to play for the Patriots afterwards, but he had a pretty serviceable career in the NFL. I discovered both of them thanks to these college all-star games.
He ran for 1,000 yards for both the Bills and Patriots. And by the way, Mark, the Purdue running back I mentioned is the name you might remember very well with Cleveland, Pruitt.
Yep.
His brother Craig went to Oklahoma. This is the Mike Pruitt.
Yeah, I remember both brothers.
So as we do these podcasts, before we finish up, I'm going to turn it over. Charles, is there any baseball news in the first 10 days of January?
On the 10th of January, Torstone sold the Giants to Lava Bowie Company with the intention of moving the team to Toronto for the 76th season.
Toronto Giants. Wow, that would have been crazy.
The new mayor of San Francisco, George Moscone, is going to fight to keep the team in San Francisco. He's going to go to the National League and the court and try and block the sale long enough to find a couple of local buyers to keep the team at Candlestick.
And if it doesn't go through, we could have Montreal versus Toronto on the Diamond, eh?
Yeah.
Mark, what about you? Are there any thoughts that come out of the first 10 days that stick with you?
Not that I can think or recall from this timeline.
Chris, how about you?
What stood out for me, or anything else that on the tip of my tongue?
Anything on your mind?
Yeah, who laid the bigger egg, Buckeyes or the Rams?
Well, in closing, I could talk about a couple things. I could talk about how the NFL fans are idiots, and we love them, but they're idiots. Even back then, suing the league over the officiating, and I'm surprised it hasn't been tried in the 2020s because it's one of the first excuses most fan bases go to. But that could happen in any timeline. I'm not going to talk about that. I could talk about the NFL labor union, but I'm sure we'll get more into that in the offseason. But what I do want to do is I want to do a little bit of a tribute here to an NFL coaching legend whose career came to an end, Paul Brown. He founded the Browns, and it's the reason why the Cleveland Browns are named the Cleveland Browns, as he took the Browns to the first, all four double AFC championships when they were in that league. They were part of the NFL merger in 1950 with that league, and he took the Browns to every championship game from 1950 to to 1955. And when he lost Otto Graham, he then reinvented the Browns behind Jim Brown. But strife between Paul Brown and Jim Brown would lead to Paul Brown leaving, helping to be a part of the formation of the Cincinnati Bengals, and building them into a contender who made several playoff runs in the 1970s. As time would go on, Paul Brown would fade away from the spotlight, but his legacy didn't, as he had a coaching tree that included the likes of Lou Saban, Chuck Noll, Don Shula. We're going to be hearing the name Bill Walsh a lot lately, as he was the offensive coordinator for the Bengals at the end of Paul Brown's career. Amongst other things, he invented radio receivers and helmets that were tried out, but not didn't become a mainstay until much later. The face mask. When Otto Graham's nose kept getting broken, he invented a kind of a plastic plexiglass type face mask. He also brought education and training, schoolwork to the professional ranks, as he brought the football down to the X's and O's and had players learning the playbooks. The things Paul Brown did can't be overshadowed as a coaching legend in the NFL, and he definitely did go in the Hall of Fame. And upon his passing in 1991 is when I really started to learn about who the man Paul Brown was, because he died during the preseason, and they showed highlights of him, and I really got interested in who he was and what he had done, not only just for the Cleveland Browns, the Cincinnati Bengals, but the NFL in general. And the coaching tree that he created still reaches today, as you can trace modern coaches all the way back up through to Paul Brown. So with that said, the first 10 days of 1976 are a wrap. The college season is over. We do have a couple All-Star games left. We are prepping toward the Super Bowl. And as I said in episode 9, some of our episodes are going to be spaced out a little bit for the off season. But for Chris, Mark, and Charles, I'm Vinny Vincent, and we will see you in 1976.
Good night.